When you're stuck inside with way too much time, you like cooking food, Cary's your dude. He's a little extra spicy, he's a little extra ordinary. Now you're cooking with Cary.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Cooking with Cary. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to be back. Today we're gonna do meat sauce. Now this is an incredibly versatile dish. It's got 3 different kinds of meat in it. I use veal, pork, and beef. But from a versatile standpoint, what I mean is that it freezes really well. Put it in quarts, put it in the freezer, and just take it out when you want to use it, and put it in some sort of a pot with a little bit of water at the bottom, reheat it, and 15 minutes later, you've got fresh meat sauce. It's pretty simple to make. I am more than tripling. I am making a lot today because I'm starting this thing called Carry Out, where I make a big pot of something and then end up selling it for nominal amount of money to friends and family. So this meat sauce can be purchased for 15 bucks a quart when I'm finished with it. I don't know how much there's going to be left over, but there's already been several orders, so I'm pretty excited about that. But you know, it allows me to make a big old pot, so I'm gonna use a lot of meat. I'm using 6 pounds of beef, 6 pounds of pork, and 6 pounds of veal. Now, you wouldn't use this much. This is a ridiculous amount of meat. You would use 1 pound of beef, 1 pound of veal, and 1 pound of pork. The other ingredients are, as you would expect, we've got tomatoes, we've got tomato puree, which is also known as tomato sauce, we've got garlic, basil, oregano, onion, salt, freshly ground pepper, and the things that you wouldn't suspect that are in it are soy sauce and Worcestershire, and we'll talk about that. So the first thing we want to do is brown our meat. There's no need to put any oil in it because there's so much fat in these kinds of meats. I'm using ground chuck, an 80-20 blend, which means that there's 80% of meat and 20% of fat. You want to really control your temperature here because you can burn the bottom pretty easily. It's better to take it slower than it is to do it quicker. One thing you probably heard about cooking is you want to build layers of flavor. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt to the browning of the meat. All right, so my meat is brown. I don't see any more pink. And I'm just gonna take it over to the sink, put it in a container, in a strainer, and I'm gonna let all that fat drip away. And while that's happening, dice some onions. I've got a lot of meat, so I'm gonna dice a lot of onions. I'm gonna split the onions in half, all of them at once, and then I'm gonna move on to the next step, which would be peeling and dicing. So that I've got all the onions prepped and ready to go for the next step. All right, so I've got all my onions here. They're all sliced in half, and now I'm ready to peel them. Again, I'm gonna wanna peel all of them before I dice any of them. All the onions are peeled and halved, and I'm about to dice. What I do when I dice is I take the end of the onion, and I use that as a kind of a holder at the end to keep everything together. So you can slice it like this, and then you can slice it like this, and it's not going to fall apart on you.
He's gathered his ingredients. He says now's the time to cook.
All right, the onions are diced and we're ready to go back to the cooktop. So what we want to do now is we want to get these this meat warm again and throw these onions in, all of them. We want to let the onions cook with the meat, and we want to do this until the onions are translucent. Really what that means is that they become soft and clear. Gonna add another little bit of salt. Now I want to make a point here that this is a true meat sauce. This is not a bolognese, and one of the main differences between a bolognese and a meat sauce is cream. All right, so our onions are somewhat translucent. I could probably cook them just a little bit more, but I'm maybe just a little bit impatient. Football starts soon. One of the ingredients that I didn't mention is wine. We're gonna put some wine in here and let the meat absorb that flavor in while cooking down the wine. So we're not actually using much of the liquid in the wine. Moving forward, we're gonna let that evaporate. And you'll notice the meat turning red. That's obvious why, right? Because the wine stains the meat, but it's also penetrating into the meat, again, building more flavor. All right, so the wine is almost all evaporated. The onions are translucent. Time to put some garlic in. All right, it's time to add some spice. We're gonna add a lot of basil, a lot of oregano, a little bit of crushed red pepper, and give that a stir. All right, so you probably noticed that there's a bunch of fat coming up and boiling up from the meat, and you're thinking to yourself, but you already drained the fat, right? Well, that fat comes from the remaining rendering of the cooking of the meat after we drain the fat. So it's possible we drained our meat too early, but it's okay to have fat in there. If there's too much fat at the end, it will rise to the top and you're going to be able to scrape it out. It's time to add our tomatoes. Tomato sauce, also known as tomato puree. A lot of recipes call for crushed tomatoes. I'm using whole tomatoes, and what you're going to see here in a little bit is I'm going to use an immersion blender in order to get everything in here to be a uniform size. All the chunks of beef will break down and be a uniform size. And these tomatoes, these whole tomatoes, right here, like these, they'll all blend up too. Now, just so you know, ingredients are really important, and these are Italian tomatoes, sweeter, tastier. Personally, I don't feel like it's enough. I'm going to put a little bit more tomato sauce in there. All right, so the sauce is nowhere near finished. It may be done to the point where we let it cook for a long time, but what matters most at this point is time. And letting all of those flavors meld together, cook down, and create that sauce that's going to be so delicious. At this point, we're going to taste it. See where we are from a spice standpoint, from a salt standpoint, and then gauge what we need further. Okay, beefy. The meat is still got a ways to go when it comes to simmering. The sauce is tomatoey. You can taste those spices, the basil and the oregano. It's all very raw still, meaning it hasn't had time to cook, and it really hasn't. But here's where those two ingredients I told you about in the beginning come in, and this is what creates umami. That really richness, that flavor, that taste when you're eating something that you just can't explain. That comes from a little bit of soy sauce. I know that seemed like a lot of soy sauce, but I've got a lot of meat. I do Worcestershire too. The thing is, you want to do these before you salt. There's a trick that chefs use a lot where they put anchovies in things that you wouldn't expect to have anchovies in. And the reason for that is that it creates that umami flavor. Worcestershire sauce has anchovies in it. So that's why you see chefs use anchovies or Worcestershire sauce a lot too. Again, you're trying to add things, like if you want to give it more salt, add things that have salt in them. It's kind of like if you want to make something sweet, you use honey versus sugar. New spoon. Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely getting there. I'm going to use this immersion blender and I'm going to blend this together. I don't want to do it too much. We still want it to be chunky, right? But what we don't want is for those tomatoes to be whole, and we do want the meat to be uniform in size. It doesn't take much, believe it or not, when you're using this to do that. I use it on the lowest setting. I found a tomato, a whole tomato. So I'm just gonna take my immersion blender, put it right on top of it, chop it up. You might remember I said that we're gonna use fresh ground pepper. Now's the time to do that. So we've got all of our spices in there. We've got our acid from the tomatoes and the soy sauce and the salt and all of that. It tastes great, but what it's missing to me is a little bit of pep. No pun intended. So this is going to add a little bit of spice, but it's also going to add a little bit of raspy pepperiness. If you've watched a bunch of Cooking with Cary's in the past, you know that I like fresh ground pepper. All right, so I think it's gotten to a point now where we want to let time take over and let it simmer. We don't want it to be a rolling boil. We want it to just be hot enough that you're seeing some bubbles come up. And I also don't necessarily want it to cook down all that much. I want to kind of try to keep that liquid in there. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna take the lid, I'm just gonna put it on where there's a crack on the side so that the air can continue to come out. It keeps the splattering from going all over the sink or all over the stove. But you see what I'm talking about right here, this little rolling boil. So you wanna adjust your heat so that it maintains that. So we keep that. And I would check this every 15 to 30 minutes, and I'm gonna let it cook for probably about 3.5 hours. You can literally let it cook all day. The longer you cook it, the better it tastes. Hey, so this has been cooking for about, I don't know, probably 4.5 hours now. Over the course of the 4.5 hours, I've come and I've scraped off a little bit of excess fat that's risen to the top. That's what this cup is for. I've just kind of been putting it in there and skimming off some fat. If I was to let this cool and pick it up tomorrow morning, all that fat would dry up and you could just easily peel it off. But I got someone coming here in a little bit to pick some up because, like I said, this is the first dish of my new venture called Carry Out, where I'm making big pots of food and just selling it off to friends and family. Of course, we all like to just put it over pasta, right? Which is easy, but I do it a little bit differently, kind of the way that they do it in the restaurant, where you're making the pasta and then cooking the pasta with the sauce so the sauce absorbs into the pasta and it tastes delicious. I'm going to show you how I do that. Hey, so it's the next day. The meat sauce has been in the fridge for about 24 hours. It cooked for about 5 hours. And I'm about to make some pasta and meat sauce, but you can do anything with this sauce. You can make baked ziti, you can make lasagna, you can take the sauce and you can mix a little pesto with it. You can put some cream into it and make it a creamy sauce. It's incredibly versatile. You can look at this sauce as being kind of just a baseline for tasty goodness, and then you can build on that from there to apply it to whatever dish you want. I'm gonna use some linguine, and what I do is I undercook this linguine. If it says 10 to 11 minutes, I'm gonna cook it for just at 10 minutes. And then I'm gonna take the pasta water along with the pasta and put it into the sauce that's already in the pan. I'll show you how that works. All right, so my pasta's done. It's just undercooked. I'm gonna turn up the heat on the sauce. And then I'm gonna drag the pasta directly from the pot over into my sauce. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring some pasta water with it. And that's okay, because we want this pasta to cook in the pasta sauce and absorb some of the water to continue to cook the pasta, but also to bring in some of those flavors from the meat sauce. What we're going for here is a red pasta. It's going to look red when it's done. And if we feel like we need a little bit more pasta water, we can always take a ladle of pasta water and pour it in there. We're just going to let this cook down. Add a pinch of salt. You can do a number of things to this at this point. You can add some Parmesan cheese. You can add a squeeze of lemon juice to brighten it up. You can add some more pepper, crushed red chili flake to give it some heat. And that's it. It's plated up.
Now you're cooking with Cary.